Hey there, guys. What's up? What's up? And welcome to Behind the Crypto podcast. I'm Mike Graham, and I'm your host and guide as we go on some amazing adventures, conversations with some really sharp individuals in the Web3 space. And today, for this episode, it's my pleasure to introduce you guys to Erika De Pellegrin. She's a legal strategist within the Web3 space, and she's also the founder and host of the Balance Theory podcast. Erika, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. It's really interesting, actually. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation in terms of the legal side of Web3. It's something that I think people are thinking about, but it's not the forefront of everyone's conversation, but it's massively important, right? Listen, just for us to kick off, obviously we've met, I know you, but maybe for our listeners, why don't you give a short intro and explain a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I guess you've given us a good high-level intro. So I'm a legal strategist, and then I'm the host and founder of a podcast. So the Balance Theory is my personal passion and a space for my curiosities, aside from all things legal and crypto. So that's my, if you will, passion project. But what I do as a legal strategist is I kind of operate like an outside in-house counsel for a lot of different businesses. And the reason I've coined it or called it a legal strategist is because I'm very strategic with the way I think. And over the years, I've also run a lot of my own businesses. So when I am working as a corporate lawyer, when I was working as a corporate lawyer, I also bring in that angle of having real lived experience as an entrepreneur, which I feel like sometimes there's a gap between traditional legal advice, which technically is so sound and so good, but it's very black and white in terms of what practically works for entrepreneurs. So I feel I speak that language. And so calling myself a legal strategist just feels a lot more aligned for what I actually do. And I get to work with some amazing businesses, either on a project base or just as they're starting up, to really help them get off the ground and just assist them kind of setting up with all the legal considerations they need, from contracts to structuring to licensing, etc. So that's a little bit about what I do.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. And I think it's so interesting because more and more, I think the Web3 landscape is becoming more compliant, right? It's becoming more focused on the whole legal side. And actually, you see projects now doing KYCs and really thinking about their legal setup. How did you end up in the Web3 space? So from running multiple businesses, from being a corporate lawyer, how did Erika end up in the Web3 world?
It's always an interesting question. I often ask a lot of people in the crypto space as well, because everyone's got their own way they fell down the rabbit hole, I guess.
Yeah.
So it was probably about 7 years ago. My now husband, he was working as a chiropractor, and then just someone spoke to him about Bitcoin, and that kind of just opened up a can of worms for him. And he started really researching, and then became like a massive preacher to me, started telling me about it. Now, at the time, I was working as a banking and finance lawyer. And so when I started to hear about the way Bitcoin operates, DeFi, different protocols in that space, my mind just expanded in terms of the possibility and the opportunities with what was actually being created in this space. And I also really loved that it was community-led. I feel like it went from this traditional space of profit and revenue, business first type mentality, to community driven. And I also really love the spirit of that. So just as a byproduct of my husband investing, becoming interested, telling me about it, I just got more comfortable investing in it as well. And yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. And I feel like it really came to me at a time where I was already deep in the banking, finance, corporate kind of world, seeing a lot of the issues and problems there. And this just appeared to me with so much potential. So I'm really excited about what the space looks like. As you said, it's matured a lot in terms of, your KYC and the way different countries are adopting it. But it got me really excited about the potential.
Yeah, there's huge potential, isn't it? And I think it keeps evolving, which is really interesting. It keeps changing, it keeps adapting. So from your perspective, let's talk a little bit about the legal side, kind of what you help projects with. Perhaps you could give us an example, without naming anybody, but perhaps you can give us an example of the type of things you take your clients, your projects through when they're thinking about their legal setup, like some things that would be important, because to be honest, I'm thinking about it, right? Legal setup within Web3. Okay, maybe where you set up, maybe doing KYCs. what else? But
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a lot more, right? So
100%.
yeah, shed some light on that for us.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some general things that apply to everyone. Now, it's really interesting. I always kind of get asked, like, what type of clients do you work with? And every single person I speak to is completely different because people are so innovative and creative in this space. But I really love that aspect of it. So honestly, no two clients or projects have been the same. And I honestly think it's impossible for you to find somebody that's a crypto expert. Because I think the skills that serve you more in this industry is a curiosity, is an open mind, is like a constant investment from a time point of view to just be abreast with what's going on, what are the new narratives, what are people doing, and there's this constant innovation, which is exciting. But that aside, when a client comes to me, generally speaking, they already have an idea. It doesn't matter if they've already set it up or they're looking to set it up. Where I come in and what I can assist and what's kind of the legal things that we need to consider. Firstly, you're right. Where do we set up the company? Is that in the UAE? Is it looking at a global structure? What are the actual operations? Like, what's the activity that you're doing? So if we take a lot of Web3, I guess, protocols or projects are software as a service. There's a lot of tech. So when we're talking about setting up a tech company, then you're looking at tech activities with tech licensing around it. Now, every country does it a little bit differently. Here in the UAE, for example, when you set up a company, you have to nominate what activity the business is doing, right? So identifying that up front means we immediately identify whether it falls into regulated land or unregulated or not regulated activity. Basically, what that means is if we're doing anything that is financial, dealing with securities, that many jurisdictions now have robust virtual asset and crypto regulations, and aspects of that can also be regulated. You know, if we're talking about setting up an exchange, broker dealers, managing and advising on investments, that's all regulated activity, which means you can't just set up shop and start your business. There are a lot of things you need to comply with. In terms of actually even applying for a license, it's quite a robust kind of application process. So a lawyer will generally give you that advice up front. What are you looking to do? Where's the best place to get set up? What kind of licenses do you need? Are there regulatory check boxes you need to tick or add on? Sometimes it's like third-party approvals from central banks, things like that, helping you kind of work out how do you legally run this thing and where do you do it? And second to that would be looking at the types of agreements or documentation you need in place. So you've rightly mentioned KYC. Sometimes that's required, or like AML compliance side things, depending on the nature of the business. But it could also be, you know, if you've just got a software as a service or you have a tech offering or an app, it's just the terms and conditions that go with people signing on to that app. Or maybe you're running like a client model business, so you need a client service agreement. So it's just thinking about from a very basic level, not opening too many cans of worms. I'm really like a simplistic person. I try and take the complexity out of things. And it's all about people understanding how they run what they want to run. And so it makes sense for them and their business model. And then obviously as they scale and they start venturing out into new things, so they may open up another product or service. Okay, what types of agreements come in at that point? Do we need to set up another company with a separate license to do that? Is it smart to separate it from a liability point of view? So these are the kinds of things that I help with. And I feel my place in this world is really well fitted because a lot of these projects are startups, they're bootstrapped, they're not at that funding level. And so they can't really afford to bring on a lawyer full time. So I work on a project basis or an ad hoc basis, which works well because I then get to work with a whole bunch of clients, but clients also aren't locked into having to pay counsel full time. So that's a little bit about, I guess, my involvement. And at the end of the day, like I always tell people, just because it's a crypto project or a crypto company, it's not that different from a traditional company. It really does still need a lot of the nuts and bolts that a traditional company needs. Of course, there are aspects of it that I touched on before, like it's community-led and the way it's actually structured might look a bit different. And I think on that side, there are still things to come in terms of structuring options. But they still do need to think about some bread and butter things when it comes to just running a company, right?
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I love a couple of things you said, like you try to keep it simple. It's like in Web3, people give themselves medals for trying to overcomplicate, right? So that's good to hear. And I think,
Well,
yeah,
I
it's
think it's no use. It's no use to anybody if I have a contract with my client and neither of us know what it means. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
100%.
It needs to make sense. You need to understand what you're getting people to sign. So when they have questions or when you have problems, you know what's involved.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. What do you think? And it's another point you made that's really interesting is the concept of how, even though it's Web3, a lot of the basic principles of running a business and setting up a business still apply. And I think that's quite interesting from a legal perspective, right? Because I think a lot of times when people come into Web3, founders, builders, CEOs, they kind of have a mentality that it's this whole different universe, right? And in some concepts, for example, with what we do, doing marketing, community growth, it is quite different. But from the legal perspective, what have you noticed as some, maybe, pitfalls that sometimes, they don't really think about builders, founders, they're not considering too much when it comes into Web3 from just a legal perspective. Have you noticed like some, just some things, some tips that, okay, don't do this kind of thing?
I'm not sure if you've heard or seen much about the issue with DAOs, for example, in the
Mm,
US. So I think
mm,
because maybe there's this mentality that it's not a traditional company, it's more like an
yeah,
association and people coming together. The issue is when something goes wrong,
yes.
they need to pin somebody for it, right? Somebody has to be held accountable. You can't just have this, in a traditional legal sense, when something goes wrong, if there's no nominated director, so to speak, they go
Mm,
to the beneficiaries or the people who have the beneficial entitlement to whatever's going on. So
yeah.
in the case of some issues with some DAOs in the US, they ended up going after all the DAO members for an issue that went down there. I believe it was the Oki case, if anyone's interested to look it up. So I think when we think that this is, I think because of it was a very immature and new space, it did feel at the beginning so separate and like it was just running in its own ether in the
Mm,
universe, separate from
mm,
everything going on. But that doesn't always fly when things go wrong, right? And that's
yeah.
why thinking about legal at the beginning is important. So you now have had a few years of a conversation of having legal wrappers with DAOs. But the
Mm,
problem with that was and a legal wrapper is simply a corporate veil or a shield, I guess, a way to structure it, a
mm-hmm,
mechanical way to structure it so that
mm,
it has a legal form, so that it can
makes
enter into contracts, it can own assets. If something goes wrong, there's people that are accountable. It has an identity, so to speak.
makes sense.
So people have come up with a lot of creative different ways to do that. There's now a variation of foundations that
Mhm,
exist in many different jurisdictions. For example, there's a DLT foundation here in Abu Dhabi. I believe
mhm,
there's one in Switzerland, in Cayman. There's different options available, which are not a 100% fit, but they do allow for the DAO, that decentralized feel of it, with
mhm,
members coming together and making decisions. They allow that to be kind of like a fit in the real world. I still
mhm,
think you have this mismatch between where crypto is and the idea it has and how the
mm,
traditional world is anchored and trying to
mhm.
make that fit. But I think we're moving there slowly,
Yeah.
and those vehicles are becoming more and more available. But I think a risk or an issue a lot of people have is just thinking they can operate and run business and do things completely detached from
Yeah.
the traditional, I guess, way we do business and
Yeah.
finance and things like that,
Yeah.
because that's obviously very risky and people can be personally on the line for things
Mm.
if and when, God forbid, they go wrong.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. There's kind of this legend, isn't it? Which is quite appealing, I think, for a lot of people. The whole Web3, totally separate from, the system and everything else. But there still needs to make that leap of how do you connect the two, right? And I think that kind of leads us on nicely into maybe the conversation just briefly on RWAs. Right now it's a big narrative. It's growing so much. One thing I'm very excited about with it is that the RWA concept connects. It's like a bridge, right, between real world and on-chain Web3. How do you see that from a legal perspective? Because there must be some implications, there must be some maybe complications, there must be some innovations when you're
Mm.
bringing a real world asset on chain that kind of connects the world quite nicely, right? But how do you see it from your chair?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've always thought about this myself because the RWA concept obviously makes ownership of assets way more accessible to way more people. But the technical issue I see is that every jurisdiction documents and records, let's just go with property as an
Yeah,
example, right? The ownership of that is documented in a very different way in every single country.
exactly.
Whereas the way crypto and on-chain works is quite global in nature.
Hmm.
So I mean, I'm not sure. I think it needs to be adopted on a jurisdiction specific basis because it really does need to merge with the way things are generally recorded and done in those systems. Otherwise, I mean, there are different vehicles and ways people do it. You know, you can have a company with heaps of different shareholders. That company owns the property. I mean, there's ways you can do it that way, but it doesn't allow for the ease of switching ownership that
Yeah.
crypto, like for example, you could just sell your ownership tomorrow
Hmm.
on chain because it's a token, whereas recording that practically is not as simple. And it would
Hmm.
be like an admin headache to actually get that done. So um, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. And I kind of mentioned this to you before. I think the heart of crypto and Web3 is decentralized. The way regulations, governments, laws generally work is not decentralized. But in order for this space to be mainstream, it does need some regulatory nuts and bolts to be widely adopted. Otherwise, it's going to remain this blacklisted kind of scammy
Mm.
space that people don't really understand and they don't trust because there's
Yeah.
no kind of government support around it. So whilst I don't think that these regulations and all of that are a fit for the heart of Web3, I think it's necessary in order to make it mainstream. But I
Mhm.
do think it's going to be like years in the making to actually find a fit. And then on the other side, you've got the space evolving so quickly. I think by the time it takes to pass a regulation or bring in a product or something that makes a concept make sense, it's evolved.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, totally.
I think there'll be some nice evolutions in the way things are done to make it make sense. But I think we're at the earliest iteration of it still. I mean, I don't even think I would have had a job a few years ago.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It's so true. And I think it's interesting to hear your perspective on that because, yeah, different countries obviously have different regulations. Crypto is very, country limitless. It doesn't really have the boundaries, right? It doesn't have the border limitations. And so it almost feels like crypto will create its own rule sets within certain geographies, but still have that global reach and impact, which is really cool. So listen, let's talk a little bit about you and your goals and your aspirations within the industry. What are some of your goals? Where are you thinking of being in the next 3, 5 years? Like what are you working towards?
I feel so I've kind of come out of the corporate world and working in a law firm, and I'm now doing this as a consultant. And that's a move I've always dreamed of because I'm now working on my own time. I get to choose my clients. I get to work not only as their lawyer, but I get to be involved in projects, which is why I call myself more of a legal strategist because I have that entrepreneurial cap on my head.
Mm,
So to be honest, it's just continuing to do more of this, going deeper in the space, working with more clients. I kind of would like to have like a set 5, 6 clients that I sit on the board for that I'm constantly advising them on rather than constantly churning over projects. Like I'd like to actually really grow with some core
mm,
projects and be really involved in their business.
mm.
But I stopped setting like really long-term goals a long time ago because there's so much happening and things look very different every 12 months. So I've kind of anchored my long-term aspirations more in my values and how I want to feel rather than the exact picture of what it looks like. Like I've really moved away from that whole vision board idea and been a little bit more open in the how, but
Mhm.
my why and, this flexible life I have with amazing work, that's kind of where I want to be. So just more of that
I
for
love that.
now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. And let's talk maybe industry perspective, right? It's like you said, it's such a fast moving industry. I think one day sometimes feels like a week like a month like a year. What would you see? Like, what would you like to see as some goals and changes with, maybe developments within the Web3 world? Like where do you think we're going? And what are some things that you're excited about? Like, what would you like to see happen?
Yeah, I think like for example, a narrative that I'm quite interested in, and it kind of goes back to what I introduced before, is, and it's a little controversial because it's not doing that well as a sector this cycle, but DeFi. I think when I started to learn about that, and there's like new ways to earn money, different ways you can control your money, make your money, make money for you. Like, these are concepts I hadn't really thought about before. I was kind of like a get my salary, save a little bit, earn more money next year type girl. But when I started to think about the control this kind of gives people, and the different options and the different solutions and the different ways, like through yielding and staking, like all these concepts just really expanded my mind. I think that as a sector is quite exciting in my personal view. So I'm just really excited to see the innovation, because I always think it's as infant as it's ever going to be now. And there's already so many exciting things happening. And so I think this is more from the way I was kind of trained in the industry, in the sector I worked in, and what actually appealed me about crypto in the first place. I find that space very exciting in terms of how it can make investing a lot like more accessible to more people in more interesting ways.
So true, so true, so true. And I think what I love, just double clicking on that, what I love about the whole Web3 crypto world is exactly that. It gives people the ability to earn money in different ways, and sometimes in geographies that they wouldn't have those opportunities, right? I mean, we're blessed, I think, very much to be able to open a bank account easily, but there's so many countries in the world, and my eyes got open to this when I joined Web3. We're opening a bank, just opening a bank account, which we seem as such a basic, right, is actually a big challenge. And crypto kind of enables them to bypass that almost and earn money and provide for their families, which is really cool. So listen, on that note, let's share with us a little bit. I think it's always fun, this part of the conversation. What is a coin or a token or a project like that you're really excited about?
I hope this isn't a boring answer, but it's honestly Bitcoin. And I'm not a Bitcoin maxi or anything like that, but I'm a very fundamental thinker. And when I think about the issues I personally see in the banking systems as we have them today, things that have happened in the last few years with money printing and just different issues there, I do think Bitcoin as a concept is incredibly powerful. I think the idea of, the way it works, the fundamentals of it, the finite supply, the way it kind of operates like gold 2.0, I find all that really interesting and very promising in terms of fixing a lot of the issues we have, or trust we maybe have with the banking system and corruption that sits behind that. So that's one that I particularly, just from a fundamental point of view, see a lot of potential in.
Yeah, it's not boring at all, Like, I've had quite a few of the guests on the show so far say Bitcoin. I kind of expect people to say some crazy out there projects, but the OG stands the test of time, so it's all good.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd label myself as a degen, so I probably haven't given you a degen answer.
It's all good. Listen, just to wrap up, it's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you for your time. I hope the listeners found this interesting as well. I always ask the guests to kind of leave us with either a quote, like a motivational quote for the community, or perhaps an insight, some piece of advice that they might find useful. It's totally up to you. It could be a quote, could be some piece of advice, but yeah, over to you on this one.
I think I would say, if you want something different, you have to do something different. And what got you to this level won't get you to the next level.
I love that. If you want to do something different, if you want to achieve something different, you have to do something different. And what got you to this level won't get you to the next level. That's really good.
It kind of builds in like the idea of not being complacent and continuous development and growth. And that's in all aspects: professional, business, personal, health, relationships. That's my take.
I love that. I love that. Erika, you've been awesome. Thank you so much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Behind the Crypto. My name is Mike G. This has been Erika De Pellegrin, your legal strategist. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. See you at the top.